The house was unusually quiet when I walked in. It was the kind of silence that clung to the walls, suffocating, yet strangely comforting. I had come back early from school, my mind still buzzing with the frustrations of the day. I had expected the usual clamor, dishes clanking, the soft hum of the TV in the background. Maybe the sound of Lila's gentle voice as she spoke to my father, but there was none of that. Today, Lila, my stepmother, was sitting in the living room, her back straight, her gaze fixed on the empty space in front of her. She looked different. She was always poised, always perfect, her smile like a well-rehearsed performance. But today, there was no mask. Her expression was blank, almost hollow, as if something had cracked inside her. I hesitated by the doorway, unsure if I should approach her. I had never seen her like this before. She was always the picture of grace, always so composed, so controlled. But today, I saw something else in her, something broken. "Lila?" I called softly, stepping into the room. She didn't respond right away, but after a long pause, her eyes slowly turned to me. There was no warmth in them, no kindness. Just emptiness. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice wavering slightly. It wasn't like her to be this distant. She was always the one who knew how to keep things together, to keep the peace in the house. But now, there was a wall between us, a wall that I wasn't sure I could break through. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I sat down next to her, the silence stretching between us. For a long while, neither of us spoke. I wanted to ask her what was wrong, what had happened, but the words stuck in my throat. I had never seen her like this. I had never seen her vulnerable, unsure. Not the woman who had taken charge of everything with such ease. Finally, she spoke again, her voice shaking, but still so soft, like a secret. "I've done something terrible," she said, her gaze dropping to the floor. "And I don't know how to fix it. Or if I even can." The weight of her words hit me like a punch to the chest. I had known something was off between her and my father for a while. But I hadn't realized just how deep the cracks ran. I didn't know what she had done, but I could feel the guilt in her voice. The way her hands trembled at her sides. "I don't know if I can forgive myself," she continued, her eyes welling up. "I've hurt so many people, and I don't know how to make it right." My heart ached as I watched her. I had always seen her as someone strong, someone who could handle anything. But now, in this moment, she was just like everyone else, flawed, human, fragile. "Lila," I started, but she stopped me with a raised hand. "No," she said firmly. "You don't understand. I've been lying for so long. To him, to you, to myself." Her voice broke, and for the first time, I saw the cracks. I don't know how I let it go this far. I wanted to ask her what she was talking about, but the words felt heavy in my mouth. I had an idea, a nagging suspicion of what she meant, but I didn't want to say it out loud. Not until I was sure. Did you hurt Dad?" I asked, almost too afraid to hear the answer. She nodded slowly, her lips trembling. "In ways I can't undo. I've been so selfish. I thought I was doing what was best for me, but I was only thinking about myself. I didn't realize until it was too late." I felt the air around us grow colder. There it was, the truth. The affair, the lies, the distance that had been growing between them. It wasn't just a crack in their marriage. It was an entire fault line that had split everything apart. "I've been so quiet, and I thought I could keep it all inside," she continued. Her voice so small now. "But I can't pretend anymore." I didn't know what to say. The part of me that wanted to scream, to demand answers, was overpowered by the part of me that understood the weight of her words. She was sorry. She was broken. And maybe, just maybe, she had already forgiven herself in the quiet. Because that was all she could do. The silence between us stretched on again, but this time it was different. It wasn't uncomfortable or painful. It was filled with understanding. She had confessed, admitted the hurt, the guilt, and now there was nothing left to say. I don't know what happens next, she said softly, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. The quietness of her words didn't need to be loud for me to hear them. In that moment, her silence was her apology. Her silence was her forgiveness, not just for me, but for herself. And I understood. I reached out, placing a hand on hers, and for the first time, I felt a connection to her that wasn't based on perfection, but on something deeper, something real. I forgive you, I whispered, and though it wasn't a grand gesture, it was enough. The silence between us didn't feel like an end. It felt like a beginning. Lila's eyes softened at my words, and for the first time since I had walked into the room, I saw a glimmer of relief in her expression. It was like a weight had been lifted from her. But it wasn't just from the apology she had made, it was from the forgiveness that was now being offered back to her. I don't deserve it, she whispered, pulling her hand away gently. Her eyes were filled with so much sorrow. It was as though the burden of her mistakes was too much to bear. I don't deserve your forgiveness after everything I've done. I shook my head, not out of pity, but because I truly meant it. We all make mistakes, Lila. Even the people we look up to. You're not perfect, and neither am I. But you've been honest with me now. And that's what matters. Her lips trembled, her breath shallow, as she took in my words. There was a moment where the room seemed to fall completely silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background. The vulnerability between us hung heavy, but in a way that felt comforting. Like the storm had passed and left calm in its wake. I thought I could fix it all, she murmured, wiping her eyes. But I've only made it worse. I wanted to reach out and comfort her, to tell her it would be okay, but the truth was, I didn't know if it would be. I didn't know if my father could ever look at her the same way again, if their relationship could survive this. But I understood now. Lila wasn't asking for absolution from me. She wasn't asking for forgiveness in the way most people would. What she needed was to forgive herself. To find a way to make peace with the damage she had caused. And that was something only she could do. It's not about fixing it, Lila, I said quietly, my voice steady but kind. It's about owning what happened, accepting it, and learning from it. That's all any of us can do. Her shoulders sagged as she exhaled a long breath, as though something inside her finally released. I don't know if I can learn to forgive myself. You don't have to right now, I said. Maybe that's something you work on. But the first step is being honest, and you've already done that. You've faced the truth. And that's more than most people ever do. She looked at me for a long time, her face full of gratitude. But also something else, maybe a bit of hope, though faint. I wasn't sure if this moment meant healing for her, or if it would take much longer to truly feel it. But I did know one thing. The weight of the silence between us had changed. It wasn't suffocating anymore. After a long pause, she finally spoke again, her voice quieter now. I don't expect everything to go back to normal. I don't expect things to be fixed. But I'm trying, and that's all I can do right now. I nodded. That's all any of us can do. For the first time, I saw her smile, though it was small, tentative. as though she wasn't sure if she had earned it yet. But I saw it, and it was real. The forgiveness wasn't complete, and the damage wasn't undone. But for the first time in a long while, the silence between us didn't feel like a wall. It was just a space we both occupied, sharing in the weight of everything that had happened. I stood up to leave, but before I walked away, I turned back to her. "You don't have to carry it all alone anymore," I said. "You don't have to fix everything. It's okay to not have all the answers." Lila nodded, a soft tear slipping down her cheek. But there was a lightness to her now, maybe a small spark of peace she hadn't had before. As I left the room, I realized that the silence we had shared wasn't one of resentment or anger, but of mutual understanding. And perhaps, in that silence, we both had found a form of forgiveness. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was real. And maybe that was enough. Days passed, and the house began to feel a little less heavy. The silence between Lila and me no longer had the same weight. It wasn't that everything was fixed, or that we had fully healed. But the first steps had been taken. Lila had started to open up, to talk about the things she had kept buried for so long. It was a slow process, one that required patience. But it felt like a quiet shift was happening between us. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table, a mug of tea in front of her. The same vacant look on her face. But there was something different this time. She looked up at me, not with the guarded distance I had come to expect, but with a sort of vulnerability that I hadn't seen before. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice hesitant, almost fragile. I didn't hesitate. I sat down across from her, my hands wrapped around my own mug of coffee, waiting for her to speak. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, her voice quiet but steady. "About everything. About what's happened between us, and what I've done." I could tell she was searching for the right words, trying to navigate a conversation that had been long overdue. There were no apologies left to give, no questions left unanswered. What we had now was the rawness of truth, of facing the past. "I've never really told you why I've been so distant," she continued. Her eyes focused on the steam rising from her tea. "It's because I didn't want to face it myself. I didn't want to face how I failed. Not just with your father, but with you too." I felt my heart tighten at her words. The silence between us had always been thick with unspoken things. Things that I never dared to question, things I thought I already knew. But now, hearing her say them out loud, hearing her admit it, it felt like a new kind of honesty. "I didn't want to let you in," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I was afraid. Afraid of being judged, afraid of losing you, of losing everything. But in trying to protect myself, I pushed you away. I didn't know what to say at first. Part of me wanted to tell her that I understood, that I forgave her. But I couldn't bring myself to say those words. I wasn't sure I had fully forgiven her yet, or if I even could. It wasn't that simple. It wasn't just about her mistake. It was about everything that had led us to this point, the years of unspoken things. The secrets, the silence. Instead, I sat there, listening, letting her continue. I knew that this conversation wasn't about finding immediate resolution. It wasn't about fixing everything right now. It was about finally saying the things that had been buried for so long. "I know it's not easy to forgive me," she said, her voice raw. "And I don't expect you to. But I need you to know that I'm trying. I'm not perfect, and I never will be. But I'm trying to do better. For you, for myself, for your father." I nodded slowly, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts and feelings. I didn't have the answers. I didn't know if I could forgive her fully, or if our relationship could ever go back to what it had been. But I understood now. I understood that she had been carrying this guilt for so long, and now she was finally letting it out. She was finally speaking the truth. I don't know if I can forget what happened, I said quietly. My voice steadied despite the storm inside. But I can try to move forward. I can try to understand. Lila reached across the table, her hand trembling slightly as she took mine. The gesture was simple, but in it, there was something raw and real. A promise, maybe, or just an acknowledgement of what we had both been through. I don't expect you to forget, she said softly. But I hope that, someday, you can see me for who I am now. Not just for the mistakes I've made. I didn't answer right away, but the weight in the room had shifted. It wasn't gone, not completely, but it was lighter. And that was enough for now. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. It would take time, patience, and understanding. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were finally on the same side, no longer divided by secrets, but bound by the truth. I'm not sure where we go from here, I said, looking her in the eye. But I think we can figure it out. Together. She smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek, but there was something beautiful in the sorrow. Something healing. And as I sat there, holding her hand, I realized that forgiveness wasn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes it was just about sharing the silence, acknowledging the pain, and finding the courage to take the next step, no matter how uncertain it might be. And in that moment, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. The following weeks felt like a slow and careful rebuilding. A delicate process that neither Lila nor I had ever expected. There were no grand gestures of reconciliation, no sudden epiphanies that solved everything. Instead, it was about the little moments, those brief, quiet exchanges that held more weight than any apology could. Each morning, we shared a cup of coffee in silence. Not the kind of silence that felt heavy with regret, but one that allowed space for us to exist together without expectations. It was in these quiet mornings that I began to see Lila not as my stepmother, not as the woman who had broken our family, but as a person, someone who had lived, loved, and made mistakes, just like everyone else. There were days when I would catch her staring out the window, her gaze distant, lost in thoughts I couldn't reach. On those days, I didn't ask what was on her mind. I didn't need to. The silence was hers to fill or leave empty. The old Emma, the one who needed answers and explanations, was gone, replaced by someone who had learned to accept that some questions didn't need to be asked. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, I noticed her eyes were red, as though she had been crying. She hadn't said a word about it, but I could feel the sorrow in the air. She picked at her food, pushing it around on her plate, avoiding eye contact. I wasn't sure what to say or how to help. The instinct to comfort her had faded, replaced by the realization that she needed to process things in her own time, just as I had needed to. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked softly, the words almost foreign in my mouth. She looked up, her expression weary. "It's not about you, Emma," she said quietly, her voice breaking slightly. "It's about everything. I've done things I can never take back. I've hurt people, and I don't know how to live with that." I nodded slowly. I had known it wasn't about me. But the fact that she was finally saying it out loud, finally acknowledging her own guilt, felt like another layer of the wall between us had crumbled. "I don't think anyone can undo their mistakes," I said after a pause. "But they can try to make things right, one step at a time." Lila smiled faintly, a tear slipping down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, almost as if embarrassed by the vulnerability she was showing. I've spent so many years pretending everything was fine. Pretending I had it all under control. But I was lying to myself, to everyone. I reached across the table, placing my hand over hers. She didn't pull away, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes, a flicker of the woman she used to be. Before all the pain and silence. We can't change the past, Lila, I said quietly. But we can start with today. And today, you're here. And I'm here. It wasn't a promise of anything perfect or easy, but it was a promise of trying. Of learning how to forgive, how to live with the mistakes we had made, and how to move forward. After that night, things didn't magically get better. There were still moments of tension. Still days when the weight of everything felt too much to bear. But there were also moments of understanding, of quiet forgiveness. And of shared silence that didn't feel like a burden anymore. One afternoon, as I sat in the living room reading, I heard Lila's voice from the kitchen. She was singing softly, not a song I recognized. But it was light and filled with a warmth I hadn't heard in a long time. It was the first time I had heard her sing in months. I didn't interrupt, I just listened. For the first time, I felt like we were both healing, in our own ways. The silence between us wasn't filled with guilt or regret anymore. It was filled with something softer, something more forgiving. And in that silence, I realized that forgiveness didn't always come with words. Sometimes, it came in the quiet spaces between us. In the shared understanding that we didn't need to fix everything at once. We just needed to be there, for each other, and for ourselves. As the days went on, I began to notice the small things again, the way Lila's smile had returned, the way she spoke more freely. The way she no longer looked over her shoulder with the weight of her secrets. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough for me. One evening, as I prepared to leave for a weekend with friends, Lila stopped me at the door. Her eyes were soft, and there was something new in her expression, a sense of peace I hadn't seen before. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly, her voice steady. I blinked, surprised by her words. "For what?" "For the way you've handled everything," she replied. "For the way you've let me be human, despite everything I've done." I smiled, a genuine smile, one that felt like a weight had been lifted. "We're both human, Lila," I said. "And we're both still learning how to forgive." As I closed the door behind me, I realized that forgiveness wasn't a destination. It wasn't something that could be completed in a single moment, in a single apology. It was an ongoing process, something that had to be lived, day by day. And as the sound of Lila's laughter echoed softly behind me, I knew that, in our own way, we were both finding our way back to each other. The weeks that followed felt like a strange kind of healing, one that moved at its own pace. Unpredictable and often silent, but still there. Emma spent more time with her friends. Rediscovering the things she used to enjoy before everything with Ethan had overshadowed her life. She began to feel like herself again, the person who was independent, who didn't need someone else to complete her. She was reclaiming her own space, her own identity, and for the first time in a long while. It felt good. But there were still moments when the quiet of the house became almost too much. The emptiness that lingered after Ethan's departure, after the final conversation with Lila, would sometimes settle in her chest, a reminder of all the unspoken things. It was in those moments that she would remember how much had been lost, how much had been shattered, and how everything had changed. One afternoon, as she was cleaning the living room, Emma found something she hadn't noticed before. Tucked underneath the couch cushions was the small photo album she had once made of their wedding day. It was a happy memory, one of those days that felt timeless, filled with laughter, love, and promises. She opened it slowly, her fingers tracing the edges of the photos as she flipped through them. At first, the nostalgia was gentle, the images of her and Ethan on their wedding day, smiling at each other with nothing but hope in their eyes. But as she continued through the album, the weight of those moments began to feel different. She didn't just feel sadness or anger. There was an overwhelming sense of closure, a finality to it all. She paused on the last page of the album, where there was a photo of her and Ethan standing together, arms around each other, looking out at the sunset. She remembered that day, how it had felt like the start of everything they had dreamed of. But now, it just felt like a relic, a memory of something that could never be again. Emma closed the album gently, her heart heavier than she expected. But there was something else there too, a small glimmer of acceptance, of understanding that the love they once had wasn't the same anymore. And maybe that was okay. Maybe it was time to let go. That evening, she sat with Lila at the dinner table. The silence between them not uncomfortable anymore, but familiar. They had stopped trying to fix everything. They had stopped pretending. And in that quiet acceptance, they had both found something they hadn't been able to before, a sense of peace. "Do you ever think about him?" Lila asked, her voice soft as she sipped her tea. Emma looked up from her plate, surprised by the question. "Ethan?" Lila nodded, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of her cup. "I know you two had your problems, but do you ever miss him? Or what you had?" Emma thought about it for a moment, the weight of the question settling in her chest. She wasn't sure if she missed him, not in the way she thought she would. She missed parts of him, the parts that had loved her so fiercely once. The parts that had shared dreams and laughter with her. But she also realized that who they had been wasn't who they were anymore. "I miss the person I thought he was," Emma said quietly. "But I don't think I miss him. Not anymore." Lila looked at her with something close to admiration in her eyes. "I think that's the hardest part. Letting go of the person you thought someone was. It's like, you have to learn to let them be who they really are. Even if it's not what you wanted." Emma nodded, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. "Yeah. I think I've been holding on to a version of him for too long." Lila took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. "I think I've been holding on to a version of myself for too long too," she said softly. "But I'm starting to realize that maybe it's okay to let go of that too." They sat in silence, the weight of their conversation hanging in the air. It wasn't an easy silence. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. In the days that followed, Emma felt something in her shift. It wasn't that everything was fixed, or that she had forgotten the pain. It was just that she had stopped holding on to the past with such desperation. She had learned to let go of the things that were no longer hers to keep. To forgive the things that couldn't be changed. And to accept that some things had to be left behind. She found herself smiling more often, not because everything was perfect, but because she had finally learned that it didn't have to be. She could be okay, just as she was, without needing anyone to fill the spaces she had once let someone else occupy. And in the quiet that filled the house, in the spaces where the past had once haunted her, she realized that forgiveness was not always about what others had done. It was about what she allowed herself to do, allowing herself to let go, to move forward, to accept the silence and the peace it brought. That evening, she stood at the window, looking out at the city below. The sky was painted in hues of orange and purple, the stars beginning to twinkle in the fading light. And for the first time in a long while, Emma felt free. The past would always be there, lingering like a shadow. But she didn't have to live in it anymore. The future, whatever it held, was hers to shape. And in that quiet, Emma finally found her own peace.